The Haunting Tales of Dark Shivering.
Dark Shivering is a quaint village which lies on the English and Welsh border. It is notoriously difficult to find, and with neither Wales or England staking their claim over it, it has been largely forgotten and untouched by outside hands. I stayed in Dark Shivering mainly in the 1970s, 1980s and 1990s on business. From the locals I collected many ghost stories. Here are a few of them to make you shiver. The Black-Eyed Boy of Dark Shivering. This is one of those stories that somebody's friend's auntie's sister told somebody else, if you know what I mean. Everyone in Dark Shivering knows the tale, and everyone knows someone who has come into contact with the Black-Eyed Boy. They call him a boy, but depending on who is telling the story, his age varies from between 14 to 18 years old. The first person to mention the boy to me was Mary Lynch. Mary lives with her husband Keith at the Old Dairy, which was once a large working dairy farm. Now, the dairy is more of a small holding, as Mary and Keith are both in their late 50s, and so a smaller concern suits them better. Mary is a relentless chatterbox and always has time to speak to anyone, man or beast. Many times I've passed her walking her dog down the lane and she has been in full conversation with him. I called into the dairy every time I was in Dark Shivering to buy fresh eggs, each time thinking it was only a 10-minute job. I would inevitably be over an hour when Mary got into full swing. Her story is best told in her own words, I feel, as no one can convey Mary's story quite like Mary.
It was last Friday that I met that boy with the black eyes. Nasty-looking boy he was. It was probably about 3:30 that I was taking Bert for his walk. It had been a cold, rainy day anyway, and it was already beginning to get dark. I was walking along the tree line that outlined the bottom field. I wasn't hanging about as it was cold and the sky looked like it was going to pour with rain any second. I looked all around and there was nobody about. The only movement was the smoke coming from the chimney, as I had set a fire just before our walk. Bert ran on ahead and cut across the field back to the farm. I carried on around the footpath as I didn't want to walk through a rabbit hole-infested field and do myself a mischief. Suddenly, as if lightning was ready to strike me down, the hair all over my body stood up on end and I could feel the electricity in the air. I hurried up as I actually thought it was going to thunder and lightning, when out of nowhere I was stood face to face with a young lad. He scared me half to death and I must have jumped a mile in the air. However, he did not react at all, which in itself was strange. Now I will talk to anyone, as you know, but this boy felt dangerous. I felt that I needed to get home as quickly as possible, so I didn't say a word to him. I just sped off straight through the middle of the field, which I hadn't wanted to do. I rushed through the tufts of grass, eager to get to my house. I didn't like the look of that boy at all. He had a sinister quality to him. At this point I couldn't tell you what he looked like, as I was too keen to get away. Finally I got to my side door, hauled it open, and me and Bert went inside. I was so frightened by this boy, even though he hadn't done anything to me, that I rushed to lock all of the doors and made sure the windows were all shut too. I called my husband on his mobile to tell him what had happened, and he told me to keep the doors locked and that he was on his way home. I started to feel relieved that Keith would be home shortly, and I was glad Bert was there for company. After a minute or two though, Bert went and stood at the door and started to growl quietly. His fur all down his back stood up like a Mohican. At this point I was really beginning to worry. I started to feel like I was in some bad horror movie. I didn't want to look to see if he was outside the door, but I would rather know where he was than to be caught unaware. I pulled the curtain away from the side window slightly, fully expecting this boy to be stood outside my kitchen door. I don't even think I was breathing. I was so scared, but I could see the porch area and thankfully no one was there. I started to breathe again and turned around to soothe poor Bert. As I turned I looked down the hallway towards the entrance hall, and there this boy was, large as life, stood outside my front door. The door that I had only just locked was now wide open with a stranger stood in its frame. I let out a cry, but the boy didn't move. He didn't even attempt to come inside the house, so I mustered up some courage and rushed towards him. "What do you want?" I asked. "Excuse me, would it be okay to come in and use your phone, please?" His reply was so unnatural in sound and tone I wanted to cry. His words were long, deep and dragged out as though someone had turned the speed down on a record player. I was almost frozen with fear. The hallway was in darkness and the only thing I could do was fumble for the switch. When I clicked the light on and everything became illuminated, I stared at this stranger and he stared back with big black glossy eyes. No whites, no iris, no definable pupil, just deep black holes. I slammed the door shut in his face. He didn't try to gain access, but he kept talking in that horrible slow voice. It sounded like he was melting. "Excuse me. Would it be okay to come in and use your phone, please?" "Excuse me. Would it be okay to come in and use your phone, please?" "Excuse me. Would it be okay to come in and use your phone, please?" At this point I'm just about to grab the phone and call the police when I see my husband's vehicle approaching the courtyard. Thank God, I'm saved was all I could think. Keith hurried to the house and I stood in the hallway waiting. When he came in, the boy was no longer outside, and Keith said that he couldn't see anyone at the house when he arrived. Now, my story sounds totally unbelievable, totally made up. If someone told me this story, I would think they were pulling my leg. I didn't think there would be a soul in this village who would believe me, but I have proof. Even Keith can't explain what happened. On the flagstone floor outside both the kitchen door and the main door are a set of footprints, both exactly the same, scorched into the stone, just where the boy was standing. They appeared after my horrible experience and I've tried to clean them off with all sorts of stuff, but nothing will remove them. They are there for everyone to see, and most of the village has been by to have a look. I won't be walking Bert on my own again. I don't feel safe like I used to, and it's not because some strange boy visited me that day, it's because that boy was not any kind of human that has ever walked this earth. It was like being stood in front of a monster, except you couldn't see this monster, it was hiding.
I have to say, Mary's story gave me the utter creeps, especially as she told me whilst in her kitchen, where the incident happened. I can honestly say, as God is my witness, she does indeed have a black set of footprints outside both doors. Since she told me her story, I've always felt quite apprehensive about being on her property. It feels spooky even in the summer. Having said that, if you listen to all the black-eyed boy stories, the entire village is unsafe. According to the locals, you'll be safe as long as you don't invite him into your home or vehicle. What happens if you do, I'm not sure, but I don't think I'd be inclined to invite a boy into my home with a voice tempo problem or lumps of coal for eyes. Another story which actually made the local newspaper at the time was a particularly unusual incident involving the residents of Puddle Lane. It was late on a weeknight when the black-eyed boy struck. It was 1971 and there were only 8 houses on Puddle Lane back then. He paid each house a visit and asked to be let in, and one by one, they all turned him away. Doreen Dance at number 8 wouldn't even open her door after spying him through her bedroom curtains. She said he stared directly up at her with no eyes. Mrs. Moon at number 7 opened her door with the safety chain on, and before she even noticed, his eyes had given him an ear bashing for calling on her so late. Cosmo Hayes at number 6, who was a notoriously grumpy old man, shouted through his glass door, "What did the caller want?" When the boy asked if he could come in, he was told in no uncertain terms to piss off. Mindy Mack at number 5 called the police when she was sat in her lounge watching a Hammer horror film and the black-eyed boy stood at her window with his face pushed up to the glass staring in at her. Dickie Frost at number 4 hid behind his sofa after seeing the black-eyed boy knock at everyone else's door. Rosie Turner at number 3 nearly had a fit when she opened her door to the boy. Apparently at this point he was talking Babel and punching the air with his hands, and she thought he was a ninja, like she had seen on the TV. Screaming bloody murder, she barricaded herself in. George Bishop at number 2 took one look at the boy and sent his wife to deal with him. And finally Harry Sprite was the only neighbor on the lane with large lockable iron gates that kept the boy far enough away until the police arrived. The boy just stood rattling the gates and staring up at the house as though he was longing to get in. Other stories told about the black-eyed boy are all very similar, and after chatting to lots of local people about it, it seems that they don't disbelieve these stories because all of them know somebody's friend's auntie's sister who told somebody else the story of when they met the black-eyed boy. Join me next time for more haunting tales of dark shivering. Don't forget to click like and subscribe to hear more creepy content and never miss an episode.